Good morning, friends. I'm here at my mom's and just south of Memphis, Tennessee. Outside in the south, it is 75 degrees and muggy. It's weird, but I'm glad to be on this Advent journey with you. And I want to read to you, we are concluding a week of reflecting on Jesus as the mighty God. And in this, I want to read to you a story from Paul Harvey that I think you'll really like. It goes like this. It was Christmas Eve in the Midwest. There was a man who had a family where his wife and his children were Christians, but he was not. And he rejected it. He sat home that Christmas Eve in front of the fire, and it was cold out and the snow was blowing, and his wife and his little children had gone to the chapel in the nearby village for a Christmas Eve service to honor the Christ they loved. They sat by the fire reading the paper. He sat by the fire reading the paper, and all of a sudden he heard a loud, repeated thumping. He thought someone was banging on the door, and he went to the door and opened it, but found no one was there. By the time he got settled back in his chair, he heard it again and again. And he was bewildered as to what was causing it until he realized that something seemed to be smashing against the window. And so he went to the drapes and he pulled the drapes aside, and to his amazement, a flock of birds were flying into the window. And so it was a snowstorm, you see, and had blown them in. And the birds had been caught away from their shelter and they couldn't find their way back. They couldn't fight the wind, and they saw the lighted window and the warmth of the light and were attracted to it. And they were literally flying into the glass, trying to get to the light to get warm. They would freeze, you see, if they didn't find some shelter. Well, the man who had refused to go with his family to Christmas Eve service because he had no interest in the Christ of Christmas was all of a sudden very compassionate for these poor birds. And so he wondered how he could help them. And so he opened the door and went out in the cold and tried to chase them so that they wouldn't kill themselves against the window. And when he ran to the barn and he threw open the doors and he whistled and he shooed at them to shoo them in with everything he could to get them to fly into the barn, they wouldn't do it. He even went so far as to take some corn and some bread and make a big trail from the window to the barn, but they wouldn't follow it. In frustration, he said to himself, if I could just communicate with them, if I could just tell them that I don't want to hurt them, that there's warmth and there's shelter, and they'll need to stop beating themselves to death against the glass. But I'm a man and they're birds and we just don't speak the same language. Oh, if I could just become a bird, I think I could tell them. And then it hit him. And at that moment, said Paul Harvey, and the whole meaning of Christmas dawned on that man. Mankind had been beating itself to death against the barrier that had kept him from the warmth of God's love until somebody became a man and told us the way. That's the Christmas story, Paul Harvey writes. And he who was fully God did not cling to his privileges, but laid them aside, became a servant, and approached a sinful people. I wanted to share that with you because I think it's a beautiful story of perhaps some of what went on in the Lord in the incarnation. I love you. I'm so grateful to be walking this Advent journey with you. Talk to you tomorrow at church.